Here we go. Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Proverbs 4:23. I hope you are continuing to learn our verses at home and throughout the rest of your day as we are, so that way we can hide God's word in our heart. There's a great psalm in Psalm 119, and I don't remember the number, but Psalm 119 asks a question. It says, how can a young man keep his way pure? And then a couple verses later, David, the psalmist says, I hide God's word in my heart that I might not sin against thee, or sin against you. And as we hide God's word in our heart, as we memorize verses, as we read Scripture, as we go through the Bible like we are this year, we're hiding God's word in our heart, and it will guide us and lead us into faith and life. Hey, I want to ask you, I got about 4 questions I want to ask this morning, okay? This first one's not included in the 4, but I got 4 really important questions. Three of the questions are going to kind of drive our conversation this morning, and then the last one is going to kind of be a wrap-up application type challenge question, okay? So does anybody, Father's Day, let me ask the men. Men, do you have a possession that you're the only one that thinks it has value? Right? I think we all could raise our hand, right? I saw a t-shirt the other day that said it had a piece of scrap wood on it. Like just a piece of wood, and it said scrap wood. And then it was, I just haven't found a use for it yet, right? Holly gives me heck all the time about the junk I keep. It's not junk because we're going to need it one day. Because a while back we threw something away, and sure enough, what did we need? That which we had just thrown away, right? So I have a possession with me today that probably nobody else, I'm going to bring it up here in just a moment, probably nobody else thinks it has a lot of value, but it's one of those things, you know, they say like a lot of stuff, everything has a price tag, quote unquote. This is one that doesn't, because I just don't know if I could come up with an amount of money that I would give for this item. Here it is, really quickly. It probably stinks a little. Probably smells like I smelled after I got pied in the VBS video, which, by the way, thank you if you served in VBS this year. Workers, leaders, people in the kitchen, people helping kids get from class to class. And we had an amazing time. Our kids raised almost $300 this year, which was huge for some church planter friends who were in Boston, John David and Ellie Mangrum. So I want to say thank you to all of our VBS volunteers. This is mine. Not invaluable, but like supremely valuable item. Again, it is an old, used football helmet, right? But it was mine. Me and this football helmet have a long relationship. I've had it in my possession since my 10th grade year, about my 10th grade year as best I remember. We in fact this is an old style helmet, as you can tell by the padding on the inside. We got new helmets, the ones that had that like little air, they were called air helmets, and you had a little pump and you could pump air in them and it would help form to your head. I tried one of those, I didn't like it, and so I stayed with Old Faithful here. There are a lot of memories I have with this. 3 years of football, and I procured it after I graduated somehow. I won't tell you how. But it was legal. It was not done illegally. Put it that way. But anyway, if you can't see it out there, but if you want to look at it afterwards, I'll be glad to show it to you. There are on the sides. There are some different colored. We call them stripes, right? Like getting your stripes, okay? And you'll notice there are different color stripes on the 2 sides of the helmet. There's some white. This blue and orange here is from my senior year when we played our crosstown rivals Northside. I'd like to think that those, and from memory, it would have been the right side. I like to think those stripes come from when I sacked the quarterback. Well, I almost sacked it. Well, it should have been a sack. Well, see, what happened was I hit him as he was doing this and doing this right here, and I leveled him right in the gut. Just, and he dropped the ball, and our defensive end on the other side scooped the ball up and would have ran for what would have been the game-winning touchdown. But they said it was an incomplete pass. They got it wrong. We need an instant replay. They got it wrong. But anyway, See, that's what they got the call. Anyway, these colors here are like gold and black, and that was probably from my last game. We won't talk about that one. But anyway, because we lost. But the one I want to talk about today, because this really kind of influences our, kind of leads into our message, are these stripes right here. And if you look at them real close, they're not Warner Robins red. They're actually a little more like purple. And that was from the first game of my senior year against Lowndes County High School. If you're not familiar with Lowndes County, that's Valdosta. It is supremely South Georgia, where the Nats reside, right? I was down there a couple weeks ago. Whew, they're rough. So this was from my first game of the season, senior year. We had been destroyed by Lowndes County the previous 3 years. In fact, I remember the first time we ever played them when I was in high school, my 9th grade year. They mopped the floor with us. And our coach at halftime, I was a 9th grader, so I was like on the edge of the huddle, and I was glad I was on the edge of the huddle because anybody close to him was getting hit in the helmet, pushed. He was kicking folks, I think. The language was, it was rough. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to stand over here, right? And then the next year they came to our place and beat us again pretty soundly. And then the next year we went down there and we lost again. And then our senior year, you had to travel there again. And so we were trying to figure out, it's first game of the year, you kind of figure out what you have on the team and all that. And it is a really, really close game. Really close game. They're really good. They went on to win in the 99 football season. They went on to win the state championship. And so first game of the year, we're playing them. It is like really close. And at halftime, right before halftime, there's like 3 seconds left at halftime, our field goal kicker, who is a freshman, goes into the game and he kicks a field goal, a very long field goal for a freshman kicker. Soccer player, had a great leg, so he boomed it through. And we go into the locker room up 3-0. And we're stoked because we're actually beating these guys. Like they had literally mopped the floor with us the 3 previous years. And so we go into halftime, and man, we're stoked. And so our coach at the time, not the same coach as my freshman year, a different coach, we go in, and he kind of is a really, kind of big guy, thick, not real tall, but real thick. He was like in his 70s at that time, which is not old, but he was in his 70s, and he would go into the weight room, and he would bench press like 315, just late 60s, early 70s, just in there working out with the offensive lineman. Huge guy. And he kind of had his index finger. It wasn't straight because I think he had broke it a couple times, so it was kind of crooked. So you didn't really know who he was pointing at because it was kind of crooked. So he's like, is he pointing over there? Is he pointing at me? And so we go into halftime, and he gives this like amazing kind of, at the beginning of halftime, he tells us kind of what we've done good, kind of some things we need to improve, and then he breaks us out. And I was playing defense, and so we went over here, and he starts going on the chalkboard. It was like before dry race in the locker room, so it's like chalkboard on here. And he's like, man, you got to do this. And we're talking all scheme and all that, the offensive guys over there. And I remember at some point he got us back together right before halftime. I cannot repeat, or I would not attempt to repeat all that what he said because it would be inappropriate for this context. But there's one thing that if I had to imagine, he did say at the end, as I was remembering back this week, he made this statement or something very similar to this. Men, if we're going to go out here and we're going to win this game, this was his classic line, we're going to have to go out there and we're going to have to hit him in the mouth. That was it, like not literally punch him, but like destroy them. That was what that meant. Hit him in the mouth. And of course our team went, right, rousing, staying, and we go out there and we utterly dominate the entire rest of the game. We ended up winning the game 10-3. They're from an offensive standpoint, they didn't do anything in the second half. We completely stopped other than a long field goal that they made, and we ended up winning the game. And it was a catalyst for the rest of our season because we didn't lose our first game until that bad. You remember the rest of the bad call they should have made? That was our first loss. So we ended up going 10-2 that year. Lose them to our crosstown rivals and then the last game of the season in the playoffs. But really that first game proved as a catalyst for our entire rest of the season. We didn't really even have another close game the entire rest of the season until we got to our crosstown rivals. And a lot of it, I think, had to do with that halftime speech, so to speak, or those adjustments that we made, that kind of circling the wagons type atmosphere, because we were still, kind of thinking about last season. And oh no, I hope we don't lose these guys. I hope we don't blow it. And we came out there because of what happened in that moment, and we dominated the rest of the game. As I was thinking this week about like kind of where we are in our, we're going through the Bible in a year, and it's June. It's kind of toward the end of June. What I realized is we're kind of at that halftime juncture ourselves, right? We're fixing to transition. Into the away from the Old Testament and into the New Testament, and so we're kind of at that halftime. So I think it's appropriate that we take this Sunday, next Sunday, and then we're going to kind of circle the wagon, so to speak. Make sure we're all on the same page. Make sure we know where we're going, so that we can hit the ground running when we get into the New Testament. So today, what I want to try to do is I want to ask three main questions that drive our conversation today, and then kind of wrap up with one application challenge question. As I was thinking about this idea of being at halftime and remembering back to that game my senior year and all of that moment, I had to ask myself this initial question, right? What does it look like for us to win at this series going through the Bible in a year? Like, what could we walk away in December and say, hey, we really did a good job with that. Like, we wanted that. Because frankly, here's what I realized this week. There are many of you who have read through the Bible much more than I have. Right? It's just honest. So it's not like we're going to give you any new information that you never heard before. It's not like we're going to uncover a new book of the Bible together, right? It's not like some clay tablets are going to be found. We didn't find any at VBS, out there on the playground. That didn't happen. We had a great week, but there was no extra book of the Bible found, right? So there's not any different information. And frankly, some of you have grown up in church and you've been here a while and you know the Bible and you've read through it dozens of times, maybe even hundreds of times. So what would be a win? Like why do we do this, and what does it look like for us to win in this? Well, that was a great question. And I literally, on my whiteboard, y'all know if you've been in a meeting with me, I like to write on the whiteboard and do the sticky notes and all that kind of stuff. And so I was on the whiteboard and I was writing down. I wrote down 3 or 4 things. And I'll be honest with you, the first 2 or 3 were really bad. They were like, ooh, this is not good. Is this why we're doing this? And then in a moment of clarity, I realized the reason I wanted to do this in the beginning, obviously so we could get the idea of the importance of the Bible. More than that is so that we can see that there's a unifying theme or a unifying message throughout the entirety of the Bible. That is from Genesis to Revelation, even the prophets. Let's be honest, the prophets are very hard. We talked about Obadiah last week, and he's, whoo. And then you read some of the other ones. Ezekiel talks to dry bones and they come alive, and you're like, what does that mean? And through every part of the Bible, we see this one underlying message that goes from beginning to end. Well, that led to the second question. All right, if a win for us in this series at the end of the year is to see there's a unifying message throughout the Bible, then I had to ask the question, okay, well then what is that message? Right? Like if we could summarize the Bible in one sentence, what would that be? So again, dry erase marker board, right? Stretch that out, erase, line through, and all that. And then I remembered a statement I read several years ago that I've probably quoted often here by Sandra Richter. And here's what she says. When she's talking about the Bible, here's her definition. She says, this is really key. If you want to write this down, I would encourage you to write this down. Here's what she says. And I'll have a graphic up here in just a minute because Kathy's going to throw on the screen for you to help you kind of visualize it. She said, Sandra Richter said, that the Bible is God's work of redeeming people back to himself. The Bible is God's work of redeeming people back to itself. So if somebody were to come up to you this week and say, hey, I see that you go to Valley Grove. I see that you worked at VBS this week, or I saw that you liked this church. Hey, tell me what the Bible is about. Guess what you could say? Hey, you know what? The Bible is about God's work of redeeming people back to himself. And they'd be like, whoa. Then they'd ask you the next question. What does that mean? Right? So let's talk about that just for a minute. Miss Kathy's going to throw up some circle. Picture it's going to have some, eventually have 3 circles on it. It'll have 1 to begin with, okay? Because I realize that's a big definition. What does it mean that the underlying theme of the Bible, like there's one message across the Bible, and that one message is that God is redeeming people back to His place and His presence. So what does that mean? Because that's a big word. So let's kind of break this down, okay? So the first circle you'll see up there has the word redeeming, or has the phrase redeeming people. When we speak of redeeming people in both the Old and the New Testament, the word redeem is a slave trading term. All right? It is a slave trading term. The word redeem actually means, think of it in these terms, to buy. Okay? To buy. So whenever you went down to the slave market, each slave had a price. That was called the ransom. Okay? So ransom equals price, redeem equals buy. And so what you would do is if you wanted to procure a slave, you would pay the redemption price to ransom them. Does that make sense? Right? All right. So that's the word in both the Old and the New Testament. It has that connotation of buying a slave and paying the price, redeeming that slave, right? So in the Bible, so in Mark 10:45, you're in Mark 10:45, right? Read Mark 10:45 with me. These are Jesus' words. Here's what Jesus says. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve as a ransom for many. Right? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve as a ransom for many. What is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, me, myself, I came not to be waited on hand and foot, to sit in a regal seat of royalty and have people taste the wine and bring me food, and after they've eaten it, then I'll eat it. No. Jesus said, I'm not here to do that. Jesus said, I am here to serve as the person who buys people back out of slavery. And so when we talk about redemption, when we say the underlying theme of the Bible is that God redeems people, what we're saying is, or what we're meaning, or what I mean, is that the entire Bible is about God bringing people at whatever, listen to me, at whatever cost, at whatever personal cost to Him, back to His presence. Right? That's what we mean. That's what I mean. That's what we're going to mean for the rest of this calendar year when we look at the New Testament. Whenever we say the underlying theme of the Bible is that God redeems people back to His place and presence, when we speak of redemption, we mean that God, at whatever personal cost to Him, which was His own Son, the life of His own Son, His Father's Day. I love y'all to death, but there's no way in the world I would give up one of my kids for you. And you probably wouldn't do the same for me. And that's okay. I'm cool. I'm not offended. Right? But yet God willingly gave up His own Son so that He could bring us back. Right? Back to what? Well, that's the second part of the definition, right? So you'll see the black screen now has another phrase. His people, or His presence, His place, right? Redeeming people, His presence, or His place, His presence. See, God, listen to me. God doesn't just redeem you from something, but He redeems you from something and to something. Right? Remember my halftime speech, right? What if Coach Finley, that was Coach today, head coach name, what if he'd have come in and just said, all right, guys, y'all get together. I'm going to go out here for a smoke break. And then just be like, y'all are good. I'll see you back on the buses. Hope y'all do well. No, what did He do? He rounded us up. He circled the wagons with us. He said, hey, guys, I'm going to be in this with you. I'm going to help lead you from where you are, fledgling to hold on to a victory. And I'm going to help you. And I'm going to walk with you down this path. And hopefully together we can win this game. And so what does God do, right? What does God do? He says, I'm at whatever personal cost, I'm going to bring you back. And I'm not just going to leave you here and be like, deuces, I'm out of here. Hope you do well. I'll be back soon. No, He says, hey, I want to brought with you, and I'm going to bring you back over here into my presence and into my place. Well, what is God's place? Ultimately, it's heaven, right? But we're not there yet. And so the New Testament speaks about us, Christians, people who have been redeemed through Christ, about being in God's kingdom, right? About God's rule and reign. And so God takes us out of sin and He redeems us and brings us back, right, into His kingdom. And in His kingdom, here's the cool part. As I was thinking about this week, it was overwhelming to me. Overwhelming. That when God brings us back, when He redeems us back into His place, we are in God's unhindered, unadulterated presence. Right? You know what that means? That means you don't have to come to me to talk to God. You can do that at home. You can do that early in the morning, like I was today after Tucker had puked in the bathroom, right? Lord, please don't help anybody else to get this. We've got vacation coming up, Lord. If we're going to get it, help us to all get it and to be done by then, right? Y'all all prayed that prayer. Don't act like y'all hadn't prayed that prayer. Right? Lord, help nobody else is going to get it. But if we have to get it, let's just all get it and get it over with. Right? Y'all have had those prayers, and some of them are a lot more serious. But you didn't have to call me this morning. I didn't have to call you to get to God. No, you can go directly to Him, and you have access to His presence no matter where you are in the world. One of the most amazing experiences in my life did not even happen in this country. It happened in Brazil. And we were in a church, a fairly large Baptist church in Brazil, and we were singing, and I do not remember the name of the song. I just remember in the moment, I remembered that I knew the song. That sounds really weird, right? We're in Brazil. Get the story. We're in Brazil, and they're singing, at that time, a very new kind of praise song. And so they've got the guys, the praise team up there, choir, playing the guitars like we had today, and keyboard, piano, drums maybe, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember, hey, I know that song. But I'm not really good with lyrics, and so I was like, I know the song, but I couldn't sing the lyrics because I couldn't remember them. But they were singing it in Portuguese. And I was like, but wait, I know this in English. And I remembered I could get out a little, like the chorus here or there. And it was the coolest experience to me. And man, I met with the Lord in that moment in the middle of Brazil with me and the group that I was with, us 12 or 15 of us, the only English-speaking people in the church except for the pastor and his wife. And man, I met with the Lord there. Right? I didn't have to call back to my pastor at home and get him to help me meet with them. No, I had access to God's presence, to His unhindered presence. And so, as we go throughout the rest of the year, when we talk about this, the Bible has this underlying theme. It has this uniting message of God redeeming people back to His place in His presence. What we mean is that God at all cost, at every cost to Him, brings people back. And He doesn't just bring them and drop them off, but He brings them and He takes them along with Him to His place in His kingdom, into His unhindered presence, right? Let me show you how this works really quickly. Just kind of how this works out in the Bible. So you're going to see on the screen, you'll see a black circle and a blue circle, right? I believe. Blue circle says OT, Old Testament, right? So we've got the unifying message, right? Redeeming people, His place, His presence. How does this work in the Old Testament? Well, you've seen it in the last 6 months. Over and over and over again, God calls people out. Remember Abraham? Abraham was not serving the Lord. He was Abram at that time. And he was not serving the Lord. And the Lord called out to Abram and said, hey, I want you to go to a country. And I'm sure Abram said, where do I go? And God just said, go to a land that I'll show you. And he goes. And then remember Moses, after he was born in Egypt, and then he had to flee Egypt, and then he's tending sheep in Exodus chapter 3, and what happens with the burning bush? God calls Moses, brings him into His presence to kingdom place. You remember Israel at Mount Sinai? God says, hey, I want you to come to me. I'm going to redeem you. I'm going to bring you to my place and my presence, and you'll be a holy nation, kingdom of priests, right? And remember the kings? God calls the people of Israel. And then remember in Obadiah, come back to me. Remember in Psalms, blessed is the man who redeemed His place and presence. Right? See, the Old Testament, every book in the Old Testament, listen, everyone, even the ones we have a hard time pronouncing their names, and we're really unsure about what they're saying, every one of them has this underlying message that God is about redeeming people back to his place and his presence. The unfortunate part about the Old Testament is that we continually see people walk away over and over and over and over and over again. But what is God doing over and over and over again? Hey, I'm right here. Hey, come back. I'm waiting for you. I'm right here. I want you in my presence. I want you with me. I want you in my place. I want you where I am. And so the entire Old Testament shows us stories of people going away, but God bringing them back. And people going away and God bringing them back. And people walking away and God bringing them back. Right? And so as we transition into the New Testament, how does that work with the New Testament, right? Because it's different. And it's kind of not like the Old Testament in some respects. But it still has the same underlying message. We'll talk about this more next week. But what we see in the New Testament is that it's the culmination of all that God has been working on. His whole plan of redeeming people back to his place and his presence, it culminates in the New Testament. But here's the crazy part. And again, we're going to talk about this more next week. But here's the crazy part about the New Testament. It would make sense to me if at the culmination of this entire process, God said, okay, you're good. You're good. Yeah, man, you got it. Here we go. You're good. But that's not where it is. What's the last, many of you may know this. If you don't, it's okay. We'll quote it here in a minute. What's the last verse in last few verses in Matthew? What are they called? Matthew 28. The great, it's not called the Great Staycation. Right? It's called the Great Commission. Because here's what the crazy thing about the New Testament is. The Old Testament shows us that people go out, they go out in sin and God brings them out. They go out in sin and God brings them out. But in the New Testament, here's what we see. God says, now that you've got this, and now that you have it in your life, I want you to take it with you wherever you go. Remember Matthew 28, 18 through 20, go ye therefore into all nations, baptizing them and teaching them all that I am telling you. And lo, I'm with you till the end of the age. It's a short version. You can go back and read it later. But what does God say? He says, don't stay here, but take it with you as you go. So both from the old and the new. So it doesn't matter whether you're reading Genesis or Revelation. God is always about bringing people back to him so that they can be in his presence and in his place. Now here's the final question, okay? And hopefully this will wrap all this up in a nice little bow. Because this may be a little different than most Sundays. That's okay. Here's the last question I have. Why? Why in the world would God do this in the first place? Why? Why would God, from Genesis to Revelation, have every book in the Bible have this unifying theme? And that unifying theme is about God at all costs bringing people who sometimes have willfully walked away from him. Why is the Bible about God bringing those people back in to a place and position they do not deserve, and then telling them, now go out and do this? Like, why does the Bible have this theme? One word continually came to mind. Relationship. Relationship. Why does God do all of this? Why doesn't God just say, you're good? Or why doesn't he say, you want to walk away? That's fine. Why? We just got through the Old Testament, the last part of the prophets, and it's like they're nasty and just and tough and bad and just about destruction and this and judgment and all this. But yet, through all of those minor prophet books, the end is not the judgment. The end is Israel coming back and being redeemed and being back in God's presence. Why didn't God just go, enough with you, off with your heads? Relationship, right? Frankly, let me put it this way. Why did God call out the youth? Right? Let's be honest. I'll tell you, I don't know where your story is. I'll tell you my story. Man, I grew up in church. I should have known better. But yet for 15 years of my 14 years of my life, I did whatever I wanted to do. I was a good person, but I wasn't a Jesus following person. And there's a huge difference between the two, an eternal difference between the two. And why did God continually reach out to me and reach out to me and reach out to me? Relationship. See, here's the amazing thing. Why does God have this unifying message throughout the Bible? And why do you see God continually reaching out and redeeming folks and bringing them back into His presence? Listen to me. He wants a relationship with you and me and as many people as He can have one with. It's all about relationship. That's why Paul in Timothy writes that God desires that none should perish and that all should come to life. Ultimately, God knows that some are going to reject Him, right? There's other Bible verses to speak of that. But why does He do all of this? It's relationship. So, I started the story about the illustration about halftime. But here's the crazy thing. As I was thinking about that halftime speech, why did our coach give that speech in the first place? Like, why didn't he just get up there and why did he do anything at all? You say, well, that's part of his job. Well, yeah, it was. You say, well, he wanted to win the game. Yeah, but why did he go over to the defensive lineman who had played terrible the whole game and get in his face and go, rah, rah, rah. And why did he go to the other defensive guy who was equally having a bad game and he didn't go, rah, rah, rah. He went, hey man, you got it. You can do it. Why did he do all of that? Like, why was he in this guy's face cussing and finger right here? And why over here is this guy? Why didn't he do the same with both? Because he had a relationship with both. And he knew this guy needed a tail whooping at halftime to get the best out of him. And he knew this guy over here, if he did that over there, he would shut down for the rest of the game. Why? Because he had a relationship with both people, with both players. Man, with me, I remember the worst play I ever made in high school. Ever. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was terrible. It was in the playoffs of my senior year. Our coach, same guy, he called defensive plays, and he called a play for me to blitz, which is like a special defense play where I ran right, in this case, right between the center. That's the guy who has the ball at the beginning, snaps it to the quarterback. And man, I went through there. I fully expected to be hit by somebody, but it was like the Red Sea parted. It was like, and I mean, I'm running full speed. And actually, let me do it this way. I'll use the podium as the person. I'm running full speed, and they handed the ball off to the guy who's represented by the podium right here. And I ran right by him. Right by him. Because I was expecting somebody to block me, and nobody did. And I went, whoop, and I was like, no. I got like 3 zeros, which was a terrible grade. Like, we graded like 2 to 0. So if you got like 00 or 000, you did terrible on a play. But I remember, I ran right by the guy, and he went, shh, we passed, just like that. Didn't even touch each other. And after the play, I remember he hollered and he pointed his finger, and that was it. Because he knew he didn't need to do the same to me as he needed to do the defensive tackle. If he'd have made that play, he would have needed to grab his face mask and shh. And usually he did that about every game, and the guy was fine. But he needed to do that like in the first quarter of every game. His name was Anthony Vance. They called him Vance. He'd like, Vance! And he'd grab his face mask and he'd shake it all around and do all this. And he'd be like, you better get out there and hit him in the mouth. And then he was fine. But why did he do that with all these different people? Why didn't he coach everybody the same? Because he had a relationship with each and every player, and he knew how to get the best out of each of us. Man, why does God, when people walk away, why does he expend all of this energy and do all of this at his own personal cost to bring them back to him? And why does he walk us along the way? And for some of us, why does he get on to us a little bit more than others? It's not because we're worser people. That's terrible English, okay? It's not because we're worser. It's because God has a relationship with us and is trying to get the best out of us and move us all the way down the track, right? And so it's all about relationships. So here's the last question. I told you the fourth. Here's the fourth one. This is kind of application and conclusion and challenge all wrapped in one. Here it is. How is your relationship with the Lord? How's your relationship with the Lord? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the million-dollar question. Because God desires to be in a relationship with you. So are you desirous to be in a relationship with Him? Or are you kind of like, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm cool. I'm all right. Like, I don't need God. Or I need Him, but I'll ask Him when I need Him. I don't need Him all the time because I can do right. How's your relationship with the Lord? Because, see, a lot of times it's easy to come to church. It's easy to do the church thing and sit in the pew and look nice. And, oh, we took a bath. Yay. Just washed my hair for the first time this week. Oh. Right? Right? But how's your relationship with the Lord? How is your relationship with God? Like when we walk out of the doors, where are we at with the Lord? That is the question. So that's your challenge this week. As you go home, ask yourself, how's my relationship with you, God? Or maybe even a better way to ask the question is, hey, Lord, what is hindering me from having a better relationship with you? Is it the time I spend with friends that I don't need to spend time with? Is it what I watch on TV? Is it who I need to be hanging out with that I'm not? Is it this time I spend on my phone, on silly games and Facebook and social media, which are awesome, but addictive? Right? What is it in my life that's hindering me from walking further with you? I don't know what it is for you, but that's your challenge this week. So as we continue to walk through the Bible, and we're going to look at a little bit more of this next week. We're going to kind of dive in just a little bit more on the New Testament next week. But this week, here's the question I want to ask you, or I want you to ask. How is your relationship with the Lord? Because God is redeeming people back to His place and His presence. So where do you fit in to that? All right? Pastor Joe's going to come up. Miss Reva's going to make her way. I'm going to pray in just a minute, and then we're going to go into our response time. Lord, thank you so much for your grace and mercy. Thank you for who you are and for all that you do in our hearts and lives. And Lord, I pray that you would continue to move in us and you would continue to pull us back. Lord, we are wayward and Lord, we are sinful and at times we walk away. But Lord, I pray that your grace and your calling would be strong in those moments when we do. And Lord, that we would come back to you, that you would bring us graciously back into your presence. And Lord, that we would continue to walk with you further down the road, further into your kingdom, and further into your presence. Lord, thank you for the relationship that you desired with me. Lord, I don't know where we're at this morning, but there may be somebody here today who doesn't have a relationship with you at all. Lord, I pray that that would change today.